Hello guys, welcome back to this tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going ahead and talk about built-in exceptions. Now, Apex provides a number of built-in exception types that the runtime engine throws if errors are encountered during the execution of the program. And there are different kinds of exceptions available based on the scenario. So let's say if you are dealing with a list or you are trying to access an element of the list which is not even available, then in that case an exception will be thrown. So for example, you have added 5 elements in the list and you are trying to access the ninth element. That's not possible because there is no such element available because you have only added 5 elements. So in that case, an exception will be thrown. Another type of the exception that we have is a null pointer exception, which basically is any problem with depressing the null variable. So let's say you are calling a method upon an object which is pointing to null. So in that case, a null pointer exception will be occurred. Any problem with SOQL queries can result into a query exception. Basically, you are trying to assign a query which returns no records or more than one record to a singleton X object variable. So in that case, a query exception will occur. And another type of exception that we have is a S object exception, which is basically related to the S object records. Like you are trying to change a field in an update statement, which can only be changed during the insert. So in those are the different kinds of exceptions. So you have S object exception, query exception, null pointer exception, and list exception. So these are very common exceptions which you will come across in day-to-day activities at work. And now that what we are doing is we are going ahead and take an example of each one of these exceptions. So let's first start with a list exception. So what is this list exception? Any problem with the list, such as attempting to access an index which is out of bounds, will throw a list exception. So what do I mean by that is, so let's go back to our developer console and let's go ahead and write a program here using a list. So I am going to create a list here and the list is of type integer, means it will have integer element inside of the list, and the name of the list is li is equals to new of list. So what I'm trying here is I'm defining a list which contains the type integer. So that means only numerical or integer values can be added to this particular list. So here I am adding my first element here and the value of the element is, let's say, 15. So this is my first element that I am adding to the list. And then what I'm doing is I also added another element, let's say 30 here. So how many elements are there in the list? 2 elements are available in the list. And now what I'm doing is I'm trying to retrieve the first element. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say li index of 0. And that means, what does this first li of 0 means? Whatever is available at the index of 0. So what is available? 15 is available at index of 0. So basically the first is equals to 15. So if I go ahead and say system.debug, let's say element at index 0, and I'm going ahead and print the value of the first variable. Now, next thing is, let's say I'm trying to access the second, let's say I'm trying to access the another element here, and which element I'm trying to access? At index 4. Now, as you can see here, there are only two elements, which means there is nothing available, or there is not even an index 4 in picture right now, right? Because you have only two elements available. One is at location number, the one element is at the index of 0. Let's take the marker here. Yeah, index of 0, you have number 15, and at index of 1, you have number 30 here. There is nothing on index 3 or 4 because there are two elements available. So in this case, what will happen here is this particular thing will throw an exception. You are trying to access the element at the index of 4, which is not even available. So this is the list exception will occur. Even though this particular line has no issue, there is an element available at index of 0. Even though this particular line has no issue, still it will not get executed because an exception has occurred here and we have no way of handling it. So if I go ahead and execute this program, you are going to see here is it tells you list exception. What kind of exception it is? A list exception, and what it is says, list index out of bounds, which means that hey, you are trying to access an element which is not even available. It's an index out of bounds exception. So how I'm going to handle this? I can handle this using a try catch block. You have to handle this exception because right now what happens is once this exception is thrown, nothing get executed after that. This particular statement doesn't even get executed even though there is no issue with the statement. So now how we are going to handle this exception? The code that you think can result into an exception, we will put inside of this try block. So I am going ahead and put all this code here. which which I think can result into an exception. So I'm going ahead and cut and paste here. So all this code, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle the exception. So what will be the type here? You cannot use DML exception here because the exception that this code is throwing is of the type list exception. Means you have to have a catch block corresponding to that particular exception type or a generic exception. What do I mean by that is, for example, what kind of exception this block of code is throwing? This is throwing a list exception, right? This is throwing a list exception. So what you need to do is you need to handle this exception correspondingly. So I am going to say system.debug the exception has occurred, and then I'm going to display this message I am going to call this method available in this exception get message. So this particular piece of code can result into an exception. And what will be the type of exception? The list exception. So when this block of code throws an exception, it will be handled by this catch block, and then it will continue with the rest of the program. Okay, since we have written inside of this, so let me go ahead and declare the variable here. This is because of the local variable, right? So here I'm going ahead and hit the execute. So in this case, an exception is thrown. That's why the catch block got executed. You can see here the first line is coming from the catch block. The exception has occurred, list index out of bounds, and that is at index 4. You are trying to access at index of 4, which is not even available. And then after that, what happened is this particular line got executed, which says at element at index 0, and what is at first? It is the value of 15 here. So what kind of exception occurred here? A list exception occurred. And what kind of catch block I had? I had a catch block of type list exception. Instead of remembering what kind of exception is thrown by what kind of code, what you can do is you can just use a generic type here. You can just say exception, means basically it is like the parent class, like this, for all of the different exceptions. List exception, DML exception. This particular catch block can handle any kind of exception. So instead of having this specific catch block, you can just have this particular catch block for exception. So in this case also what will happen is this particular catch block will get executed, and it will say the exception has occurred, list out of bounds, element at index of 15. So basically what happened here is this particular catch block is executed, and once the exception was handled, this particular statement got executed. So we were able to handle our list exceptions. Now, this catch block will only get executed if the exception has occurred. So if I go ahead and comment this part of the line, now in this case, no exception will occur. The catch block will not get executed. Only this particular statement will get executed. So now if I go ahead and hit the execute button here, go to debug only. You can see here element and index of 0 is equals to 15, because in this case this try block does not do any exception, because you are not trying to access any index which is out of bound. So in this case the catch block did not get executed, only this particular statement got executed. So this is how you handle an exception. Any problem with the list, such as attempting to access an index which is out of bound, will result into a list exception. So in the next tutorial, we are going to go ahead and discuss another built-in exception. So I will see you then. Let's meet in next tutorial. Have a good day. Bye.